Spoilers ahead for Atelier Yumia, as well as the Mysterious, Dusk, and Ryza trilogies. Also, this script was written on the base state of the game when it came out, so before 1.20 that introduced legendary difficulty for further context. I don't think that should change anything about what this video says. Anyways, consider this your spoiler warning. Also, side note, you're going to hear me say Atelier a lot instead of Atelier because I didn't know how to pronounce it at first, and at this point it's muscle memory. When I first began playing Atelier Yumia, I was cautiously optimistic. Within the first few hours, I found myself actually having fun. Yumia's intro and the tutorial made a very strong impression on me, and I was eager to see this confident, spunky gal do more in the world. In that honeymoon period, I was enchanted by the world map, shooting everything that moved and everything that didn't, scaling cliffs like I was in Skyrim, and really pulling up every last material I could get my hands on. But there was always something nagging at me. And by the time I reached the second region of the game, this enchantment had long faded. Perhaps it was just exiting the honeymoon period, but over time I began to more and more greatly dislike almost every design and story decision in Yumia. I finished it purely to see if I would be proven wrong about my thoughts on it at the last minute, but unfortunately my expectations of anger and disappointment were met. What led to this rapid decay in sentiment? In hour 2 of my 47-hour playthrough, although realistically it may have been more around 40 hours considering how potentially 7 of those hours were purely particle farming, I was having fun and was curious to see what would happen. How did I end up disliking Yumia by, say, hour 15 to 20? As I ruminated on it, I came to the conclusion that I would like to now argue. Atelier Yumia is not an Atelier game. It is lost, or perhaps more fittingly for its story, forgotten, the soul of Atelier, and depending on how one strongly feels about it, has also potentially become its antithesis. To argue my point, we're going to compare Yumia to several of the modern games, those being the Dusk Trilogy, the Mysterious Trilogy, and the Ryza Trilogy. If we want to be more fair, assuming Yumia is the first in a trilogy, we could limit it purely to Ayesha, Sophie, and Ryza 1. However, because we're arguing about the soul of Atelier, which is present in each game, I felt it was permissible to expand it to all the games in those trilogies. First, let's cover what this video is and isn't. This isn't meant to be a full in-depth review of Yumia. Additionally, we're only going to cover the main story events, treating side character stories as if they don't exist, as they don't affect the main plotline. When it comes to comparing to previous titles, I will hold myself to this restriction as well for fairness. The main story is the core driver of the themes and overall message the games send, and because Yumia does not have any meaningful different endings or routes like a visual novel based on your character's side story completion, I consider it fair to analyze strictly the main story. We may also discuss gameplay mechanics insofar as how they relate to the argument of how Yumia has forgotten what the soul of Atelier is. However, don't expect comparison on, say, how the flow of combat in Yumia compares to the flow of combat in Ryza. With that, let's answer the driving question. What is the soul of the Atelier series, at least the modern entries we have selected for comparison? The soul isn't necessarily a single uniting identity. What we're after is a loose set of core traits that all of them have to more than a minor degree and also have impact. Sure, all of them have an alchemist as their protagonist. That's not an impactful core trait. We're after something a little more sublime. To answer this question, we're going to answer 2 questions. 1, what is alchemy in each game? And 2, what do the characters and story believe alchemy to be? Let's start with the first of those 2 as it's a lot easier to answer. What is alchemy? What are its mechanics, if applicable, and how does it work? In Dusk, alchemy is a relatively rare art being studied by Central. In fact, as of Eska and Logi, they even have new style alchemy, which is less potent compared to old school cauldron style alchemy, but anyone can do it provided they put in the study and time. The old style still requires a bit of natural aptitude, in contrast. However, outside of this, we aren't given much of a glimpse into alchemy's inner workings. We understand it has some rules to it, such as Ayesha forgetting to stir her cauldron and it almost exploding on her, and that there is some level of predictability to it considering all the recipes we pick up. But we're never given a solid, this is how alchemy works. In Mysterious, alchemy is alive and well as a practice, to the point there is an active region-wide program to certify alchemists. In fact, with Lade and Sule, this certification program seems to extend beyond kingdoms, so you can take it to mean that alchemy is practiced worldwide. Considering Pyrrhus, this isn't much of a surprise, as you can find certified alchemists in almost every major settlement. We continue to have a rough understanding of alchemy, with there being recipe books that imply predictable results, but we also have our alchemists coming up with ideas due to the inspiration taken from just doing things. Alchemy's mechanics are kept to a minimum, as there are also some cutscenes regarding cauldron temperature and how much to stir, but just like Dusk, we're not given too much. We also learn there are multiple alchemy types running around, such as Corneria's alchemy that is strictly limited to man-made things and that it causes her to shrink. Sophie's brand of alchemy, which is utilized by the protagonists of this trilogy, is one that fulfills the wishes of materials, turning them from what they are into what they want to be. However, the exact mechanics of either are kept to a minimum, and so like Dusk, we are not given too much. In Ryza, alchemy is more of a lost art, perhaps even more rare than in Dusk, but not so lost that people aren't unfamiliar with the term, especially outside of the Oran people, who have a very good reason to not forget what alchemy is. Alchemy's exact mechanics are kept to a minimum, similar to Mysterious, though we are also made aware that particularly powerful syntheses, if failed, can have catastrophic results like permanent injury, such as Amphel's arm. I think you're beginning to see a pattern here. What about Yumia? In Yumia, alchemy is said to explicitly be the manipulation of mana, an energy formed by memories that return to the land when you die. The tutorial box says explicitly, Yumia can create tools by weaving memories, or mana, together. This ability is known as alchemy. She herself says, there's lots of mana all around us, but alchemists are able to manipulate it directly, manipulating mana, creating recipes from engraved memories, reconstructing materials by offering ingredients. That's alchemy. You could say it's similar to Mysterious, but in Mysterious, we are only really told that it's an alchemist's power that can turn materials from what they are into what they want to be, rather than coming out and saying how this process plays out. Additionally, alchemical research is framed as recalling recipes, with the memories serving as a guide for making tools rather than us ever picking up a book for a recipe. This is reinforced by the Unlocking Recipes table being called the Recipe Recall table and Yumia's statement. Now, there's nothing wrong inherently with being a little bit more specific. However, this is very explicit, as now we have a pretty concrete idea of how alchemy works. In my playthrough, I hit this point around the sub 1 hour mark and even remarked about how this is a far cry from previous Atelier games, where alchemy is really just more of a, hey, it works, rather than trying to lay out exactly how it all comes together. It's not the strongest mark against Yumia, for sure, but it does represent us losing a core trait present in all the other games before it. I think the bigger problem is in how alchemy is set up in Yumia. Let's look at the process on how Yumia advances her alchemy. Yumia finds particles. Yumia uses particles to recall, and note the keyword recall a recipe guided by the memories. Yumia can use more memories to strengthen her ability to manipulate mana for a particular item, perhaps learning more from the memories of the land on how to be more efficient, or just put more items in. This much is left unclear. Now, learning recipes from others is nothing groundbreaking in Atelier. In all 3 trilogies we've explored so far, a lot of recipes can be learned from books, but several of them have them come up with their own recipes, resulting in unique items and at times having to engineer their own solutions. In Dusk with Eska and Logi, they even developed their own engine and upgrade an airship using their newly developed alchemy without a recipe book to guide them. In Mysterious, each game has its own inspiration system where you unlock recipe ideas by being inspired by things, such as seeing certain weather phenomena or using mining bombs to gather materials. In Ryza, you have the skill tree that lets you learn a few key items, but the story also has you come up with certain key items that wouldn't have been put in a book. One thing I'd like to point out is that every important recipe is still a recall for Yumia. What this results in is a lack of improvement on her part. I think this is more shown with the motorcycle, the energy core, and the double-triple jump. These have parallels in Ayesha and Ryza. In Ayesha, we have the wind shoes that let you cut down on your travel time on the overworld. They are very important considering how you are on the clock. The first time you ever craft them, it's unlikely you will be able to make them at full power, but even the smallest boost is good enough. In Ryza, you also have the wind shoes, and eventually in Ryza 3, the Spirit Beast Whistle. Just like in Ayesha, it's highly unlikely you'll be able to max them out the first time you're able to craft them. But eventually, as you improve as an alchemist, get better materials, better intermediate materials, and the ability to put more items into a synthesis, you'll be able to max them out completely for a huge boost to your movement speed. In Yumia, you have the motorcycle core that you eventually make, that you make once. And improvements you get are from the altars, which have nothing to do with alchemy. Have this lined up with a previous Atelier game, you would first craft an inefficient motorcycle. It's faster, consumes a lot of energy, but it's still an additional convenience tool at your disposal, and it's just really cool to have. Its recipe would have one required item, the motorcycle core, essentially itself. That way you can always go back to this recipe and improve it when you're able to. So as you advance through the game and gain better materials, and more importantly, stronger intermediate materials such as better ingots, you can eventually upgrade its properties such as the speed and energy efficiency, perhaps to the point it doesn't even consume energy anymore. You might also eventually be able to give it the ability to double jump and maybe even float on water when you get to the really advanced stages of the game. The same goes for the energy core and the jumping boots. You could start off with a base double jump. Then as you improve in your alchemy, you can develop the triple jump, the reduction of fall damage, and so on. The energy core should be something you similarly build on over the course of the game, being able to add more energy, increase efficiency when creating small crafts like bullets, reducing the rate of consumption when you're in a mana-bound area, and so on. Ryza has something similar to this across all of its entries too. When you start with your tools, they're very poor quality. You can only get the first tier of wood, and you don't get a lot of materials, for example, with the axe. But you can improve on them slowly to where you can get more materials, higher quality materials, better and different materials. Then you run into your carry limit for tools. But as you improve further, you can actually start to develop combined tools as an alchemist and overcome this limitation. It's very natural, and when you can see that upgrade in your synthesis menu, it makes you want to chase after it and eventually develop the improvement. To further compound on our lack of improvement as an alchemist with how Yumia is set up, Yuma is almost explicitly copy-pasting to some degree. Every important recipe is recalled. Yumia never develops anything on her own, unlike all the alchemists before her. It represents a massive misalignment from the soul of Atelier, a slow but steady improvement, as well as unique items for each alchemist such as Sophie's Flame of the Yen or Logi's Blitzes. Perhaps the biggest slap in the face is when we pick up Lily Boria's energy core. It is said to be explicitly better than ours, and we never even bothered to try and research it, duplicate it, or perhaps have it used as a catalyst to turbocharge our own. It's just it's a one-time use, whatever. Additionally, while Yumia fixes the mana-bound areas temporarily, we are aware that the Empire was using devices. It doesn't make sense that Yumia wouldn't eventually develop a more permanent fix, but we never do that in the game, and she never actually actively pursues anything like that. You can see that we're just cruising along. We don't develop anything of our own. So when we ask each series, what is alchemy? You can see how Yumia flies in the face of its predecessors to its detriment, having lost a core part of the Atelier identity. Its answer to what is alchemy causes such a massive fallout that it almost poisons so many portions of the game, and it ends up not feeling like an Atelier game. Now that we understand what alchemy is in each series though, the more important question we need to answer is what does each series believe alchemy is, which can be answered by seeing what the characters themselves believe it to be as well as what the story pushes. This question, I would say, is more important compared to the first one, but it was important we answered what alchemy was to each series so we can see how that affects how each series approaches it. In the Dusk trilogy, alchemy is a tool, a very potent tool at that. It enabled the rise of civilization to peaks never before seen, such as with airships and artificial life forms, but it also enabled the greed and hubris of humanity due to careless usage. This realization forms the climax of Eska and Logi, but is more present in Shally overall. In Shally, the titular characters figure out that much like the administrator of Geosis, the Lord of Water lost faith in humanity and stopped helping with water due to their selfish desires, theorizing that they created something with alchemy that was only for the sake of humans rather than the world at large. This is later revealed to be the fact that the Lord of Water poured her power into the land and water to protect it, despite how the ancient humans were using more water than could be naturally replenished and pumping out contaminants as a result. Humanity did not realize that they were stealing her power, as the Waterman Manage device was not stopped, as humanity failed to realize that the seawater was not limitless and that they were not actually generating water, and so she eventually abandoned them. In the prelude to this revelation, Keithgrith also remarks that you may find the deeds of humanity down below, and as the Shalleys discover the truth, further remarks that the Dusk may be the anger of the planet towards the sins of humanity. The errors of the past are always laid at the feet of humanity, not alchemy, by Keithgrith as well as the alchemists and non-alchemists of the party. While alchemy was the tool of choice of the ancient civilization, the series recognizes that it is not the fault of alchemists solely nor a failing on the part of alchemy, the art. It is the fault of humanity as a whole, the alchemists that performed the work, but also the non-alchemists that fostered the culture that chased after greedy and careless alchemy, and all the humans of the past that failed to realize that they needed to be stopped, perhaps not seeking the truth as our protagonists currently do, or willingly look the other way out of convenience, ignoring the truth. Alchemy itself is not the cause of the downfall, but rather, as Keithgrith also says, the culture of alchemy that exhausted the planet. In the same cutscene he says this, he adds that, as long as we rely on the legacy of the past, we cannot stop the Dusk, we can only delay its advance, indicating that on some level, he believes that alchemy can be the solution. But it cannot be reliant and trapped in the past, unlike the Central he finds himself at odds with, that does not care for the art of alchemy, but more so for what it can do to fulfill their ambitions. Unlike those ancient alchemists, the Shalleys, as well as Eska, assert in later cutscenes that they want to use alchemy for good and to enrich the lives of others, and in other cutscenes featuring new-style alchemists like Miruka, they are less focused on the fact alchemy was used and more on the nature of humanity that wielded it. This pushes Dusk's core idea of what it thinks alchemy to be, that is, a potent tool that amplifies the best or worst in people depending on that person's character. Ultimately, during one cutscene that features all of the series' protagonists, Aisha remarks that they are studying the past specifically to avoid repeating these mistakes. Eska reaffirms she wants to use alchemy to make everyone happy rather than exploit what she can do with it, and the Shalleys parallel her sentiment. In the final third of Shalley, this intent is constantly hammered on, that they have to actively work to avoid the mistakes of the past so the future, one that they might not even get to see, one that risks all of humanity so the world can return to a healthier state that humanity won't face extinction in, can be realized. It's poetic in a way, that with both the past alchemists and present alchemists wielding alchemy as their tool of choice, the past was so mired in greed and corruption that they nearly doomed nature and the planet out of either ignorance or neglect for the sake of humanity's convenience. But in the present, with a reversal, they are prepared to put humanity on the line to save the planet, but not out of a sense of sins of the Father. There is no woe is us moment where they want to sacrifice humanity for the planet out of a sense of collective guilt. Rather, they put humanity and society as they know it on the line because as things are now, nothing will truly change. So to keep humanity alive, they must risk humanity as a whole by destroying the water controller, because it's the best long-term solution that they come to after shedding ignorance by seeking the truth for both the planet and humans. And all of this to the backdrop that they wield alchemy much like the ancient civilizations did, and they are making an educated decision on what they will do with this tool as opposed to the ignorance, willing or not, of their predecessors. In the Mysterious Trilogy, I would argue that it believes alchemy is an uplifting force. While Sophie has undercurrents of its danger, it's a very specific type of alchemy, ablation alchemy, later called elimination alchemy, and its indiscriminate use attributed to Luard that made it dangerous. Plakta herself even muses that if it were used responsibly, it would be an incredibly powerful tool. Although, to be fair, later entries drop this as ablation or elimination alchemy is specifically noted to be bad. But overall, alchemy is the tool to realize dreams. Sophie can chase being a great alchemist like her grandmother and restoring her mentor and greatest friend, as well as no longer chasing after the cauldron of knowledge to shortcut her way to performing great alchemy. Firis can be free from the confines of her village and travel the world as she pleases underneath the blue sky she always dreamed of. and Lide and Sule can bring their family together and lift themselves out of poverty, as well as helping their father recover his confidence to continue pursuing the dreams he promised to fulfill. This doesn't even account for the vast amounts of people they help along the way, even just taking the main story into account and not character side stories. And unlike Dusk, the final true end of Mysterious ends in a golden age of alchemy, where alchemy is recorded in history books and paintings as having been thriving, enriching people's lives, filling them with miracles and happiness, which only serves to push its message that alchemy is a force for good and the tool to realize dreams. In Ryza, alchemy is first seen as a way for Ryza to escape the dullness of her life. But through the story of Ryza 1, learning of the atrocities committed by the Clinked Kingdom, this ends up shifting, and even more so when Ample's story is revealed. Rather than just a way to escape the seemingly unreasonable rules and expectations forced on her, alchemy is transformed into a very potent tool she needs to wield wisely, as she knows for certain she does not want to end up like the Clinked Kingdom's alchemists, committing atrocities left and right. In addition, the Orange she encounters obviously view alchemy with caution, as it was the tool of the Clinked Kingdom that betrayed and genocided them. But they have a maturity to it, where they give Ryza a chance and observe her, even knowing she's an alchemist, as they understand alchemy itself is not to blame, but rather those who wielded it. Ryza and Ample are both recognized as the good kind of alchemist, each called Honest Alchemist by several Oran characters, as if it was something like a title. And with the final boss of Ryza 3, alchemy and its knowledge is something agreed by all the protagonists as something that should be shared and spread through the world. Of course, with the caveat it's wisely and honestly used rather than for exploitation, making its ultimate argument that alchemy is a tool that deserves to be widespread to lift others up rather than be used to fulfill ambition, convenience, and exploitation of others. In all three of these trilogies, the characters and story push the idea that alchemy is wielded as a tool, neither good nor bad, although leaning much more towards good in Mysterious. Although Mysterious does still possess tinges of a message that despite alchemy being viewed in a more positive light, it must still be wielded for good to make it good. Meanwhile, in Ryza, even the race that was straight up genocided by an alchemy-wielding kingdom does not hold a grudge against her, as evidenced by the meeting with Kala. She is obviously guarded because of those who came through the gates before, but she even entertains Ryza constructing an atelier in their territory. It is clear that she does not judge alchemy the art, but rather she judges the person who is performing it as well as their intentions. This sets a somewhat common tone across these games too, that if you dedicate yourself, understand the art of alchemy, and truly cherish it instead of doing it for the sake of doing it for some selfish end such as power or envy, and ensure you stay the course of responsibility, amazing things can happen for everyone with alchemy. It's a comfy sort of tone, one that even the bittersweetness of the Dusk trilogy didn't overpower in all of its games and overall. In Ayesha, the titular girl was able to get her sister back. For Eska and Logi, they were able to convince Flamu to give humanity another chance, but also soar the skies in an airship that helped Logi overcome his previous traumas and give Eska a place she felt she could help. And in Shali, the Shalis are able to fling a light into the future, knowing that they may not see the full fruits of their labor, but that they did the right thing and are striving to ensure that the world will see another day. The world in Dusk is struggling but alive and finding ways to thrive. And in the Twilight, there are people who shine like lights and lead the way to that better tomorrow, like our alchemy-wielding protagonists. I won't belabor this point too much with every trilogy, but I wanted to highlight Dusk. It is the most cynical or dark out of all the modern trilogies. So how does Yumia stack up? With Yumia, it doesn't take long for the anti-alchemy stance to come out, as it's a core premise of the game. It's not an immediate red flag, but it certainly grabbed my attention. We're quickly shown that Yumia is more barely tolerated, and one wrong move will see her imprisoned or worse. It's a bold move to take the core mechanic of the franchise and criminalize it, but let's see where it went. Eventually, it's only Yumia, an alchemist, who can clear the mana-bound areas. We work hard to clear the first region, but ultimately, nothing has changed. There's no real admission that the Expedition Corps was wrong. You can do all the quests you want for people, make the whole region accessible, and we've yet to see a cutscene where people admit they're wrong, and that maybe alchemy isn't the evil taboo they've made it out to be. Rather, the cutscenes are more about, hey, this is great for the expedition team, or just recognition that Yumia's abilities are vital to the research team. but that is not the same as an admission that alchemy isn't the evil that they make it out to be. If not about alchemy, at least about Yumia either. The most we get at this point is oh, she's not so weird. Regardless, Yumia persists in her belief alchemy is a good thing, primarily driven by the memories of her mother, who made people smile and brought so much good with her craft, even if it was practiced in secret. So we've got this nice interplay until we meet the Welleks. The race who essentially invented alchemy by teaching mana manipulation now completely rejects it, saying it is a punishment for their forefathers doing this. As such, they live a life without alchemy, rejecting even associating with alchemists, and vow never to even come close to alchemy. Heathcliff would have an aneurysm meeting these people. Comments about Keith aside, we are hit with yet another faction who despises alchemy, even if they have to rely on Yumia to use alchemy to fix their problems, whether they know it or not. Yet, Yumia persists on, even when confronted with living proof of the atrocities that alchemists committed, and I note emphasis on alchemists, not alchemy. She persists in her belief alchemy is good, or at least can do good things, even if it's shaken a bit. And you know what? This interplay back and forth, it's actually not half bad. I dislike that 99% of characters despise alchemy and by extension alchemists, but Yumia trying to carve her own niche out for alchemy in a world that despises it, trying to be that exception, isn't so bad, even if a little out of Atelier's usual tone. Where this careens off a cliff is at the end of the third region. After Yumia is yeeted off the tower by the Emperor, she burns memories due to mana overuse. Worryingly, she burned away the memories of her mother. Before we go further, I do want to address I'm aware there's a lot more buildup and we are skipping a lot. However, this scene is the linchpin to Yumia's message, and it is essentially the climax to all of that buildup and Yumia's arc. Every moment was leading up to this turning point at the climax, and every movement she makes after it is driven by the revelation in this scene, which is why we're going to focus more on it rather than all the scenes building up to it. Yumia begins by questioning just what alchemy is, and if her mother did the right thing, referring to her practice of alchemy in secret. She continues on, stating she always had to believe alchemy was a good thing, because otherwise she'd be making her mother a bad person, a villain, just for its usage. This in turn informs why she claimed she couldn't accept what happened with Lily Borea, and that she refused to accept the truth of alchemy that lay hidden in this land. More specifically, losing the memories of her mother finally allowed her to see this truth. Then she continues on, saying, speaking with the others, let her think on it more, on how she should face alchemy. Ultimately, she says she loves alchemy, that even without the memories of her mother, that won't change. That the fact of helping people with alchemy made her happy, and that alchemy is neither right nor wrong. And as such, she needs to accept all the tragedies that accrued because of alchemy. So, what can we take away from this? What is truly the way alchemy is viewed by the world of Yumia? For that, we need to consider what Yumia says and what her companions do. Let's first look at Yumia. For one, she abandons the notion that alchemy is a good thing. She says she does so in light of losing the memories of her mother, that because she no longer has any memory or attachment to her, that she can see alchemy was purely a tool. It's neither right nor wrong. It's just a matter of what one does with it. You can call it a maturation, but considering the world around her, it comes more across as Yumia having the idealism beaten out of her. This is further hammered in by Yumia becoming more of a crusader, vowing to stop more sins from being added to the name of alchemy. Is this similar to Dusk? On the surface, yes, but there's a key difference. Atelier is no stranger to past alchemists committing atrocities left and right, and Dusk especially. Where Dusk differs is that in the face of atrocities, the cast moves to fix them, but more importantly move past them for a better world. This is less so in Ayesha, but absolutely true in Eska and Logi, and especially true in Shali. This also holds true in Ryza's overall trilogy, with Ample's quest to seal all of the gates, but also Ryza 1 in particular, with how it wasn't enough to beat the Felucia back, but that Ryza needs to fix the island, even if in secret. For Yumia, she remains trapped in the past and never makes that connection to strive for an alchemy like the one she envisioned her mother using. That yes, alchemy is a tool, but she can wield it as a tool for good, to redeem alchemy in the eyes of the world, and that yes, fixing the mistakes of the past is part of that. Instead, she settles for a highly neutral, if not slightly cynical, outlook on alchemy. It won't stop her from liking it personally, but she abandons any sense of idealism in its usage. Let's also look at what her companions and the story say. To put it simply, they remain unmoved. Over the course of the main story, no matter how far the expedition gets purely off of the back of Yumia's alchemy, never in the main story does anyone so much as argue that Yumia's alchemy is a good thing. No, not that her alchemy is inherently good, but rather she is doing good with it. That Yumia's personal brand of alchemy isn't a sin. At no point do they say anything like they'll fight for Yumia's vision of alchemy when they leave and go their separate ways, to advocate for alchemy on her behalf as a responsible and honest alchemist. As such, we can take it that they either implicitly agree with Yumia's conclusion, or they remain unmoved in their belief that alchemy should remain taboo. So where does that leave us? On the surface, Yumiya makes the case that alchemy is just a tool to be used for either good or evil. But if we look at the actions taken, as well as the lack of rebuttal and refusal of alchemy's taboo, Atelier Yumia actually makes the case that alchemy shouldn't be practiced. The idea of the Welleks' abandonment of responsibility is never questioned nor refuted. Instead, it's treated as a stepping stone in Yumia's journey to discover alchemy isn't as shiny as she cracked it up to be. Yumia's companions, as part of the main story, never break rank from the idea that alchemy is taboo. None of them vowed to advocate for her or push against the idea in the face of all they've seen. By fixing the mistakes of the past and not aiming for a new future of good alchemy, it's almost as if the game is arguing that if alchemy had never been discovered, never used, all of these tragedies would never have happened. In fact, the lack of rebuttal of the Welleks serves to perhaps even lean towards making the argument that they are correct, that alchemy should have never been introduced, as all these atrocities would never have happened otherwise. And Yumia herself even forsakes the idea that there exists a good alchemy, one that brings joy and wonder like her mother did. In Atelier Yumia, the way its story and characters are, showed that it believes alchemy is a negative force on the world, unlike its predecessors. In one of two endings of the game, Yumia destroys the almighty memory vial, citing it as too dangerous to keep around. This, as far as I'm concerned, is the canon ending. Why would Yumia keep it around? She loves alchemy, personally, sure, but she no longer believes in a good alchemy. For a tool that has wrought so much tragedy, why would she ever believe it could be used for good when she herself discarded her mother's alchemy that brought joy and smiles to many? And realistically, with what we know of this setting, she would be kept under lock and key if she kept it, never being able to use what she learns from it for any good. Keeping it should result in Yumia becoming the latest Keithgriff, going rogue and making it on her own. And so, after having destroyed the last remnant of the past, there Yumia goes, believing only in stopping sins being attributed to alchemy, rather than trying to inspire new positive memories. So let us return to the original question. What is the soul of the Atelier series? The loose, connecting threads that bind them together. And that soul is a sense of comfort, even with the at times hard questions it asks, but also belief in the rewards of hard work. It's an attempt to say that we can be better than those that came before us, that the world is alive and brimming with things to discover that can improve you, as well as people to share in those comforts of slices of life despite the occasional harshness of the world. And most importantly, it is a look towards the future of what can be and how we can get there. Ultimately, with Yumia's story, characters, and the alchemy system, I hope I've made my case on why Yumia has lost the soul of the Atelier series, if not becoming its antithesis. It lacks a true sense of comfort with the weight of disdain for your craft pushed by almost every character crushing you the whole time. Ironically, it is one of the major villains in the game that is the only one to have any respect for you as an alchemist. Speaking of, its alchemy has no uniqueness, no way to reward hard work, only how much your patience farming particles can last, as opposed to being able to slowly claw your way up to better crafts as you grow. And it lacks any vision of a brighter future, ironically so obsessed with the past, or perhaps fittingly so. It lost the charm of exploration, of wonder, of developing something new, and now even has the audacity to make alchemy's taboo unchallenged. Its taboo is never ultimately overturned with a small but steady hope for the future, like the alchemists of Dusk. The sins of the past are left only buried, never overridden, with a shining dream to chase with all of your might, like the alchemists of Mysterious. and it never has the audacity to go all out, defy the taboos to an even greater extent, and to save the world even if no one will know about it like Ryza. There's even more that we could go into than just this streak of complaints, but I think those are the main ones. And that's just the overall tone and feel. Somehow Dusk, taking place in the twilight of not just civilization, but perhaps all of mankind, and Ryza 1 that features 2 genocides, have a more comfy feel to them. What happened, man? I know they're clearly building up to a sequel, but I have to say, if they do that, they need to fix this and find the soul of Atelier again. I might end up making a follow-up video to this one on how I would fix Yumia from the ground up and remake it more in line with what I would think Atelier's soul is based on what I just talked about. Some of the mistakes I think can be fixed with a bit of narrative reframing, make it passable, but if we want a really good Atelier game, there are so many mistakes that are just fundamental. They're impossible to just slap a band-aid on to fix. That probably won't come for a while, so please be patient. Anyways, I just want to say thank you for listening to me rant about Atelier Yumia for the past 30-35 minutes. Honestly, I really wasn't planning on making this. At one point, I just was so incensed by Yumia because normally I don't make these kinds of videos, but I just wanted to get everything down and really think about it and just push it out there. So just let me know what you think. Happy to discuss it in the comments, and see you guys next time.